And this thing, I thought I would get kind of into the grain and the material of like what it's like to be a science fiction writer with architectural problems. And I thought I would, illustrate this kind of as best I can with like a kind of slideshow of the adventures that Jasmina and I have been in Turin. So we went to Turin, Italy. I'm from Austin, Texas, and Jasmina's from Belgrade, Serbia, and we're a married couple. So, wherever we go, one of us always has to be the exile or the emigre, unless we're in a place like Torino, in which case we're two exiles and two emigres, and that seems to open up potentials. People just ask us to do unusual things. So in turn, we got very involved in electronic art, technology art, light electronics, the maker seed, open source software, open source hardware, network art, and the kind of thing that Turin is well known for. I mean, it's a city with a lot of technical education, a lot of manufacturing, and it also has a lot of empty buildings because it's basically the Detroit of Italy and the headquarters of Fiat. And Fiat came a cropper in the 1970s due to Japanese competition mostly. And a third of the population left the city in the ensuing economic depression. So it's a rare example of a European city with a whole lot of square meterage of empty buildings. And if you want to do something in Turin and like reuse some of this empty space, the Turinese, including their city council and a lot of their other people, are very eager to help you. So this particular building, which ought to look pretty familiar to people in this SCI-Arc building, is a foundry. It was built in 1919 by an architect, very famous in his day, named Giovanni Antonio Porcheddu. And Porcheddu was a Sardinian orphan. He was literally raised in an orphanage as a barefoot, poverty-stricken child in the obscure island of Sardinia. But he was also an architectural genius, and it was soon noted by the people around him that he seemed to be an extremely intelligent and determined young man. And so he was given a number of scholarships and became an architect, and adopted a technique from France and Belgium that was an early form of reinforced cement. So he was the first architect in Italy to make use of this kind of reinforced cement building technique, ferro-concrete, and what the Italians would call armed cement. So he built a number of buildings all over Italy with increasing fame, success, more and more personnel, and ended up as a very, very famous architect. And he built this one in 1919, and he was famous for building bridges out of this ferro cement. He built 6 bridges in Turin, which are still standing. And he was also famous for building these industrial structures, which were sold because they were flame-proof and explosion-proof. And they were also seismically resistant, which is, believe me, a big deal in Italy. So he just basically measled Italy all over with these giant ferro-concrete structures, which are, actually kind of elegant and pleasant to work in once you get used to them. So he built this one in 1919 in conditions of great stress. The Italians had just won the First World War, but there was a huge economic depression going on, and Turin in particular was almost having a communist revolution. And it amazes me that he was able to stick this thing together under such extreme difficulty, but he did, and it's actually a rather serene building. In the 1940s, it became a fascist weapons plant and was lavishly bombed by the British. So that accounts for some of the peculiarities of this building. But it's not a historical preservation effort because it was blown up instead of rebuilt in this very hodgepodge-like fashion. We are kind of enabled to do pretty much anything we want. So the building had a few squatters in it. It was basically limping along. When the zealots who built Torino's first Fab Lab moved into this space, mostly because they could get electricity in there and they could occupy as much square meterage as they wanted. And we knew them. They were friends of ours. And they were the pioneers in this building. Then later, a co-working space moved in because they too could kind of subdivide the place and loft it out. And then finally, the Arduino light electronics enterprise moved in. So at this point, they were basically re-industrializing this building. So we knew people in all of these things. I mean, we knew a lot of design people in Turin. We knew the FabLab people, the maker scene. And we were on extremely good terms with Arduino because they build actuator devices, which are boards, chip boards, electronic components that enable you to turn software commands into electrical signals, which means you can automate structures and machines using these Arduino things. And in our Share Festival, we're exceedingly keen on this kind of kinetic art and environmental art. So they were going at it hammer and tongs in this building when we were hanging around with Massimo Bonzi, the capo of Arduino, and some of the FabLab notables. And Jasmina had the bright idea of challenging them to build a home in their factory. Now, as it happened, both Jasmina and I were looking for a home in Turin because we have European residency, and we thought perhaps we would settle down in the city. But we didn't know what kind of home we wanted or what kind of apartment we wanted, and we thought, well, maybe we can get these guys to like build us a rehearsal version of our own apartment, and we can like get some good ideas about our own place to live. Because as Massimo Bonzi says, if you work for an open source project, you should try to solve your own problems and not somebody else's. So we're two foreigners living in Turin, and we don't mind living in a peculiar way. So we offered to pitch in on this open source project, which Bonzi then named Casa Jasmina, because it was Jasmina's idea. So this is the early days of Casa Jasmina, in which our construction crew breaks into a part of the building that basically hasn't been open since 1974, and it looks like the house of Usher in there. They come in with the jackhammers, the pickaxes, they're just knocking holes through the wall, lofting out the place, repainting it. And after about 6 months of determined effort and some corporate sponsorship, here we have Casa Jasmina with the Jasmina of Casa Jasmina, dressed in her Austin outfit, making Italian espresso, and a very nicely kitted out Valcucina kitchen, where our friends at Valcucina, frankly, for the sake of public relations, donated a bunch of very top-end electronic kitchen equipment, which we could never have afforded. We started bringing artists in residence. They're like decorating the place. This is the Casa Jasmina bedroom. It's got the first inhabitant of Casa Jasmina, which is the Roomba. The robot was the first guy to live in the place. It's got a nice piece of foam core furniture from the Kram Weishar group. It's got a laser cut, a rather router cut, Casa Jasmina sign. It's got, various pieces of hardware attached to this stuff hidden under the bed. Here's our electronic art fair gathering in Casa Jasmina, where this is our jury, the most distinguished jury we ever had in Casa Jasmina. The woman in the shawl there is the founder of Share Festival, Chiara Garibaldi. That's Jasmina next to the wall, standing. And then the woman drinking the espresso with the short hair is Captain Samantha Cristoforetti, an Italian female astronaut, and the woman who spent more time in outer space than anyone else. And then the other woman chugging down our espresso is Paola Antonelli, who is the curator of design for the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So this is Casa Jasmina really on top of its game. I mean, we're like pulling in the celebrities here. And naturally, they didn't come just to see our house. Actually, the curator wanted to meet the astronaut, and the astronaut wanted to meet the curator. But nevertheless, this is what we wanted to do with this scheme, right? I mean, we're running an art fair here, and we're like trying to drag in some star power. And we had this is us deciding what we're going to put in our art fair. And I'm artistic director, and that's why I'm like running the show with the laptop. And sure enough, we did decide on our art fair, and then we had this public appearance, and women flocked in from all over Turin to like meet these girls. And here we're like kind of firing on all cylinders. I mean, we've got a functional social space, which used to be a ruin, but now is like obviously a place where like people are kind of pushing the envelope a little bit creatively. And the fact that it is a home rather than just like a barracks or a place to wash and sleep, it's actually an architectural fiction or a design fiction, because Casa Jasmina is designed as if there was a family in it. For instance, it has a children's room, although there are no children in there. It has a lot of personal items in there that kind of belong to no person in particular. But it's a mock-up of an actual domestic space. It's not just a residency. What we're trying to do is like offer a place there where people can design for consumers, for families, for the Turinese, and kind of do these forward-looking kind of interventions in an open source spirit. So it's a Turinese open source home of the future that behaves as if it were a home. It's got food in the cabinets, it's got alcohol, it's got places to sleep, it's got toys for kids who don't exist, it's got a garden. And the fact that the family is fictional does not actually slow down the project. If anything, it accelerates it. Because when you walk into the place, it actually feels like it is a home. And also, there's a lot of female interest in this space, which is why people from the Internet of Women Things group meet in Casa Jasmina. And they basically meet there in order to talk about political and domestic implications of the Internet of Things and what it means for women and children and domestic life. I mean, really, it's about the personal as the political and the power of these technologies to either improve the lives of women or kind of accentuate things or offer new methods of being or or to oppress and spy upon people and do very other kinds of downside situations. So we have a lot of intense discussions in this, and Casa Jasmina is the most feminine space in the Via Egeo headquarters, and it's a place where women can really kind of let their hair down and confide in one another, which I think is very valuable because they're more than half the Turinese population, and you really learn a lot from their input, especially in matters like automating devices, security, what kind of objects to put in bedrooms and bathrooms, gadgets, and so forth. So we did this intervention, and the Italian press really loved it, especially the design press. So all the usual suspects of Italian design, Avatare, Domus. Okay, I'm a writer, and I've been known to write for these magazines, so it's not surprising that we would get a lot of PR attention, but we got a lot of PR attention for this. I mean, more than we deserve, but that's Italy. They enjoy it. And then we actually, had to make a number of decisions about what we were doing with the space, and and that's where I come in because I'm the curator of Casa Jasmina. So it's like my job to sort of say, why don't we have one of those, and why don't we get rid of one of these? So I have certain things in there that are kind of favorites of mine, and I wanted to go into the aesthetics of this a little bit because I think it's something that's like missing from the maker discussion in a lot of ways. I mean, if you follow the maker scene, I don't know if you're into that, but it's a kind of a subculture, and it has a kind of regional flavor, too. You see that the maker scene is mostly for the benefit of makers, and there's not a lot of discussion about what happens if you make things for other people than yourself, right? So there's a lot of kind of maker furniture, but it's almost always for fab labs or startup spaces. It's very rarely domestic in any way. And it doesn't have the allure of domestic furniture, except for the occasional thing like this particular rope chair, which I really like a lot. I mean, this stool is got a very interesting mix-up of kind of joinery, compression, and tension. And it does it in a really naked kind of way. I mean, it's got a kind of sophistication and a kind of honesty that's what I'm looking for in maker furniture. It's very easy to make, it's very easy to repair. It's less cheap than it looks, And it also just doesn't look like any other kind of furniture. It's not like an easy piece of Ikea furniture to assemble. It's actually somebody who's thought a lot about routers and what they do. And we put a projector on it to like make it a projector stand because we noticed that Casa Jasmina has a lot of digital media in it. I mean, plywood and projectors is kind of the look that Casa Jasmina somehow settled on. And then we have this old, worn-out, family-looking rug to make the place look more like a family is actually there, as opposed to just fanatics who are really interested in plywood and projectors. And we've never done much better than this. I mean, it kind of topped out with this. And it's mostly because the maker scene doesn't really put a lot of attention into the domestic space. What the maker scene likes is design manifestos. So, you know, we collect these, and we've just got heaps of them. And we tend to kind of tape them up on the wall in Casa Jasmina, and people kind of come by and look at them. And I've seen a number of these. I mean, I write manifestos myself, so I collect a lot of manifestos. And if you look at this particular manifesto, it's put together by a bunch of Danish guys, actually. You'll see that although it's making a lot of high-flown comments, every one of these things is basically a subtweet about Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. They're kind of demanding that people who run the Internet of Things do all the things that Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft are pretty much guaranteed never to do. I mean, every one of these ethical declarations chips away at their economic base and their political power. You know, if you're into open source, these things kind of make sense. But if you're on the side of the majors, the stacks, every one of these things is kind of a profoundly subversive notion. And you know, we're literally an open source hobby thing. I mean, we don't work for Arduino, we don't work for the FabLab, we don't work for Toolbox Co-working. In fact, although we live a lot in Italy, we basically have no economic presence in Italy whatsoever. I mean, we write a bi-weekly column for La Stampa. You know, I have books which are in print in Italy. They like my novels for some reason. But we're not venture capital people. I mean, this is an open source thing for which we are volunteers, we're contributors. We do it with sweat equity, and we do it to learn, and we do it to kind of like bolster our art productive community, and just to kind of keep abreast with developments. You know, and sometimes we can teach about it like I'm doing right now, I guess. But these are the players. I mean, these are the guys who have hundreds of millions of dollars and lots of engineers, and they're sort of really bringing, you know, the notion in and kind of like pouring a lot of money. You know, and every once in a while they will drop by Casa Jasmina, like we have Googlers show up, guys from Bosch. Val Cucina helped us out a lot because they're Italian furniture manufacturer. They're, you know, wondering about domotica in the home. We get a lot of corporate people dropping by, but we're basically a demo site, right? Or, you know, even kind of a Disneyland version of a potential future home. But we're keenly aware of these guys. I mean, this is actually where the industry is going to go, and we don't flatter ourselves that we're in command of where the Internet of Things might go. We're just doing it as a moral gesture to sort of offer an existence proof of how things might be different. And you know, it's a sinister space in a lot of ways. I mean, the Internet of Things is not your grandpa's or your uncle's Internet of small pieces loosely joined. The Internet of Things has a lot of cyber war, a lot of cyber crime, DDoS attacks, relentless attacks on the hardware. You know, there's a scandal every week in the IoT space as devices are captured by the Russians or the Chinese, or they break. And, you know, I'm a guy who writes a lot of technology coverage. I used to write about computer crime. So, you know, I'm very aware of this kind of dark side of the IoT and the way it kind of gets out of hand. And here you can see people who are just sitting around basically making money defending the Internet of Things from criminals. Right? or from warfare attacks, you know, from the Iranians, from Fancy Bear, from the Chinese, from the North Koreans, from heavily financed, state-supported, aggressive hacker groups. You know, and this is the reality of a kind of contemporary IoT space. I mean, there's so much trouble that these guys are just in the business of trying to police every sector and not doing a very good job, because the scene is actually riddled with crime. You know, and putting an Internet of Things connected device in your home is in fact asking for trouble. I mean, it's not simply a matter of putting together a hobby kit of electronics and thinking everything's going to be fine. So, you know, we did this project for a couple of years, Jasmina and I, and you know, we had to build it and we had to paint it and we had to like pick out the shampoo and you know, furnish the pantry and decide on the tableware and like get some glasses and come up with a font and a logo, and you know, it was like a very engaging design project, and we really learned a lot by it. And then it was pretty well done. I mean, we just had everything that you needed, and the people in the building were using Casa Jasmina all the time. People from the Turin Polytechnic drop by. It's a residency for guests for Arduino. People from the FabLab come in, they take naps there, they have showers. People gather together, they cook spaghetti, you know, everybody has discussions. It's not exactly a date scene or a bar, but you know, it's kind of a functional social media space, and you know, no doubt there are people meeting in it right now, even though Jasmina and I are 9 time zones away from this place that we built. But this is not Casa Jasmina, this is our actual apartment in Turin. And this is our marital bed in the Campidoglio district of Turin, which is a rather more upscale area of the city than the battered industrial zone where this smashed up foundry is. But you can see we've learned a lot of lessons from our experimentation here. We're doing like some post-consumer Ikea hacking, because this is your basic Ikea bed. But we just gone and like drilled a shitload of holes in the thing and then whipped out all these electronics. We're basically fiber, zip ties, all kind of cord. You know, we're clamping light fixtures onto everything. You know, we're like obviously using our laptops in the bed. We got like a memory foam bed. You know, we got bolsters up. We got wireless broadband in the place. You know, it looks like a place to sleep, but actually it's a place with a lot of electronic operation going on. And you know, before we had done this Casa Jasmina experiment, I think the two of us would have probably been embarrassed by a bed like this, you know, because it just doesn't look very bed-like. I mean, it's really like a weird hacker space. But on the other hand, the fact that we did an experiment for 2 years that was so basic and so radical really resolved a lot of our problems as two foreigners who are trying to share a domestic space. I mean, we don't quarrel about whether things should look like Austin, Texas, or whether they should look like Belgrade, Serbia. On the contrary, when we're making these decisions about our own home life, we tend to really cut to the chase. It's like, what is it we're trying to achieve here? How long are we going to do it? What's the cost-benefit analysis? Is it going to break? Is it dangerous? Is it going to set the place on fire? You know, does it look good? And so forth. And this has really helped us. I mean, this is basically the benefit we got from all this investment of effort. We were working on an open source home, but it enabled us to overcome a lot of our own marital challenges and really sort of get on the same team and build a space that we can actually work in. You know, and it's not super up to date. I mean, here we've got a rather old-fashioned Jawbone Bluetooth speaker. Jawbone went out of business. I really like its design, though. And we've got a projector, which is like the only augmented reality device. This is a projector clock from Oregon Scientific. It just projects the time up on the ceiling in like a meter-high letters. Super cheap, 20 bucks. Love that thing. We're hard put to live without it. Here's our radiator pipes in our apartment. We got very used to infrastructure, so instead of disguising the infrastructure, we decided to accentuate everything. So all the infrastructure in our domestic apartment is extremely vivid. It really pops out of the background. And on this particular pipe here, we collect the lanyards of every place that we go to talk about Casa Jasmina. All right, so we're just doing like a hell of a lot of conferences here. We really got quite the lanyard collection. And this is a nice piece of cowboy art with the globalist Texan cowboy admiring his international travel certificate. But you know, this is the kind of personal thing that really appeals to us that I don't think we would ever have done if it were not for this Casa Jasmina experience. So here's Jasmina in the living room, dressed to kill in her Texas Longhorn tights. And you can see we've got this industrial shelving, and then this kind of point, click, and stick aesthetic that we developed in Casa Jasmina, where the power cords are just kind of put on all available surfaces. There's some lighting up here at the top. We don't hesitate to just dangle electronic components off of various items. Everything mounts to this kind of perforated metal cording here. There's very, kind of vivid industrial shelving where you can reformat it, move it around, do as best you can. A few sci-fi novels kind of piling up here and there. And really one of the most comfortable places I've ever lived. And I don't really consider it home because I'm kind of a multi-locative guy, but it does actually suit my lifestyle, and I'm kind of pleased with it. And I consider it kind of a done deal now and kind of a success. So, we were pleased with that. I mean, we show up at Casa Jasmina. We still are very involved with our festival. Our friends are there, colleagues, but we're not super active. But then something happened that we really had never expected that is like our new kind of problem. So we have our House of the Future, and then we got this call from one of our cultural sponsors saying that they were moving out of one of their buildings and could we consult with them about what to do with this structure. So this is not a dead Fiat factory. This is a 17th century Baroque villa that was built by the Duchess Cristina Maria of France, Duchess of Savoy, Queen of Cyprus, who was the aunt of Louis XIV and basically the matriarchal ruler of Piedmont, Savoy. So it's a little odd that we have ended up in this palace instead of a dead factory. But I was writing a work of fiction that involved the guy who decorated this palace because I recognized that he was a very important architect in the most critical period of Turinese urban development, which was the 1630s, 40s, and 50s. So Turin was not a well-known place before it became the capital of the Duchy of Savoy. And then it was part of a Brasilia-like effort by the Savoy dynasty to protect their land holdings against the Spanish and French. So there was a multi-generational effort in Turin to rebuild the city on a kind of super rational Baroque base as an impregnable fortress. And the guy who was involved in this building is a gentleman named Count Philip Saint Martin d'Agliè, or the Conte Filippo San Martino d'Agliè, who was basically an opera designer and special effects guy for the performances of the Turinese court. So he's a bit like Giovanni Antonio Porcheddu because he's a kind of genius who comes out of nowhere and eventually becomes basically the prime minister of the widowed duchess. And they had a long-term romantic affair. I mean, he was basically her husband, although they were unable to marry. So this woman built this particular grand construction up in the hills above Savoy, mostly so that she could hide her lover in it, and the two of them could escape the court and go out to this kind of Turinese Versailles. So this building here in the middle is basically the remnants of a much, much larger structure. And this is kind of the earliest version of our villa that I can find. And I have been researching it historically for quite a while. And I'm writing this work of fiction in which Dallier is one of the characters. And I had finally gotten around to a critical part where Dallier appears and starts emitting some dialogue when we got this phone call from these people asking us would we help them with this structure. And it was truly one of the strangest things that ever happened to me. It was as if I'd gotten a phone call from a fictional character in one of my own books. I was really almost unnerved by it, because I knew Dallier had been very involved in this structure, but that he'd been its architect and kind of its guiding spirit. And that after his wife or his mistress had died, he actually spent his declining years in this place and kind of haunted it. And it had never occurred to me that I would ever go there or that it might become my office. Although, I see the parallels between what he was doing and the kind of things we were doing in this Casa Jasmina thing, because what he's actually doing is he's doing a kind of architectural entertainment fantasy in which he has like large festivals proposing improvements to the city, and then he tests them in front of the public to see if people like the idea, and if they do, then he raises money and actually builds these structures, like gates. This place has a zoo. It's got like a performance space back here for musicians. They're doing a lot of court masks, ballets, operas, tournaments. People are going around on horseback. But it's all tied into the regime's efforts to build a Turin which is actually there. There's a kind of architecture fiction Turin which exists before the real Turin. So here I am in my new office. We went up into the garret of this villa, and we really just thought it was great, and we offered to move into it and write novels in there. So we became in residence in this villa. And our sponsors are keen to promote this notion. So we're really camping it up here. I mean, we're just going out and doing the Filippo Dallier opera star version of the celebrity authors who are in residency at the palace. So yeah, we're out there with our statuary. This is not our office. but this is the downstairs office where we can sort of go whenever we want. And you see we've got instead of ratty old carpets, we've got gigantic, fantastic carpets. And we have authentic 17th century paintings and 18th century majolica jars and just an amazing heritage of bizarre debris. Here we've got our private lake in the palace and kind of our fountain. This is one of our mini chandeliers, our painted fresco. I mean, compare this to the state of that dead foundry that you saw early on, right? And imagine our shock, right? Even though they're both extremely Turinese structures, and in some ways we're actually getting an important moral lesson here. It's we show up at the dead factory and say, hey, we're cyberpunks and makers. Let's just hack the living daylights out of everything. Proviamo. And I was knock a hole in it. Try it that way. Drill it. Put zip ties on it. And, the result of that is that we're promoted into this, icy, historical space with its extremely high, it's Louis XIII literal levels of interior decor. It's a place literally fit for a princess. Here we are doing, of course, a public relations gambit, saying that we're going to move into this palace and write some novels in there, and will anyone drop by? So we're investigating the palace, and we keep finding bizarre things a tiny version of the palace inside the palace. And this is like a maquette of some guys in the early 1990s who were postmodernists who kind of lofted out the palace, but then they left their proposals for the palace up in the attic of the palace. So now we've got like the miniature version of the palace, which is like in our office. We just collected them, dusted them off. We've got like an architecture fiction from the fiction of the architecture fiction. And here's our French garden downstairs. And I would not say this place is all peaches and cream because it's been around since the 1640s, and there's areas of like quite sinister decay in there. I mean, like Edgar Allan Poe style spaces of ancient rusty pointed gates that are completely overgrown with ivy that nobody's been through in ages, and bizarre echoing chambers whose function I haven't been able to figure out. And then there's this thing, which is a pretend island in the middle of the lake, which is a folly, if you know what a folly is, right? It's an imaginary Roman ruin which was created by the people of the 1600s as a fake version of a Roman thing. So you're supposed to go out to this little island, a tiny island, about half the space of this little dais here. And you go out there in order to perform plays and recite poetry and maybe dance. So it's basically a stage. And then the stage fell over, and somebody from the 20th century had to repair it with this 20th century ferro concrete, which is basically the same kind of stuff that Antonio Porcheddu was using in Casa Jasmina's building in Via Agliè. And it would not surprise me if Porcheddu actually did this, because he's the kind of guy somebody would have hired to come in and like fix their toppled Roman column. And this is not a Roman column. This is a fake 17th century column that was beaten up and antiqued in order to look as if it was a Roman column, right? And I've been trying to spend a lot of time trying to figure out if this is the coat of arms of some actual Italian family or if it's just a piece of fantasy art, basically Game of Thrones intervention. But somebody made this and then like bashed it up so it would look authentic. And then over here on the sort of other side of the island are three actual, no kidding, Roman columns, which were dredged away from some Roman ruin and then set up as a kind of bleachers, right? So that people can sit down and like watch the play being performed on this tiny fantasy island. So they've got three real Roman columns, three fake Roman columns, and an island itself which sort of nobody has been on forever. So we invite friends of ours from Torino to come over and speculate. It's like, what are we supposed to do with this? But it really interests me that there's like this fiction within fiction within fiction, and this structure, and that these fictions were there from the very beginning. So here we are writing some fiction, and these are like books that we have in our study. And we're really studying in there. I mean, we're like writing books, but we're not faking writing books. We're actually writing authentic books in our space. They're just fantasy books that are somehow about architecture, I guess. But while I'm in this palace, these are the kind of books which are my touchstones. I mean, works on the architecture of the period, historic works about the development of Turin at that period, historic works of Italian science fiction, the oldest works of Italian science fiction, like the earliest kind of pre-science fiction Italian fantasy writings, Alessandro Manzoni's novel, The Betrothed, which is probably the most famous work of Italian fiction, which was set in the period in which our villa was built. Umberto Eco's book about the period of the 1630s and 1640s, which is about the Baroque era, and has some of the characters who I want to put in my book. And then my collection of Italian works of Fantascienza, which are set in Italy and have Italian characters and are printed in Italy, and are basically the sort of stories I'd be writing if I was an Italian science fiction writer, instead of a Texan guy who has somehow ended up with an office in a palace. So here's our palace. Nice Google shot of it. You can see we're pretty well isolated. Nobody bothers us when we're up there typing our novels. It's kind of hard to get in there. Got all kinds of greenery around us. Very sylvan. It's the vineyard of the royal madam. Sometimes it's called the Villa Abegg because Abegg was an eccentric Swiss millionaire who owned the place for 40 years or so. Here's our private lake. Here's our little island. Here we are haunting the place. There's Jasmina checking out the Baroque mirrors. Here I am. Maybe a Bollywood film crew will come by. We're in the pergola where people sometimes perform Baroque music. There's our angel. We have to make nice to the angel. We don't want to get her upset. She's the biggest angel in a place that's got a lot of angels. Here's the original founder. This is, the Duchess, Christina Maria, figure who haunts the place, a woman we've come to know well. Here's our electronically operated, highly secure gates rolling open so that guests of ours or fans or pals can come visit us. This is our office up here in our attic, or maybe they can wander around our grounds or go onto our fantasy island. Okay, this story has no particular end because we're still in this palace. But we're really grappling with the forces that caused us to end up in this, and it's I want to write something about that particular experience that kind of meshes these two things. It's why did we go from this hacker space, squat in a dead factory, into this extremely high and weirdly isolated utopian aristocratic fantasy that basically has very few friends. Casa Jasmina is swarming with people. It's busy all the time. It's one of the most dynamic spaces in Turin. And then there's this other place, which is 375 years old, which is kind of oddly friendless and almost haunted. And it has an atmosphere of foreboding about it in many ways. Certainly the most unusual space in which I've ever worked, right? And I find it an inspiring area. I actually get a lot of work done in my palace. I don't just wander around marveling at it. Somehow I'm almost a workaholic in there. I'm really kind of at sixes and sevens about it, and I don't really know what to say about it, except that I think the key is probably architectural, right? It's about the built environment, right? It's about Turin as a place, because that's a very old city, but it's also about the structure of cities and the builders of cities and the intentions of things and just the nature of the flow of time, right? And, that's actually a literary challenge, but it's a literary challenge that needs to really be informed by some more profound understanding of architecture than one would normally see in a work of sci-fi. So, I don't know. I'm kind of researching this. I'm casting about. Later this month I have to go up to Long Now Foundation in San Francisco and lecture about being futuristic and kind of writing about the future and writing about history. But, my experience in doing this and kind of volunteering this has changed my opinions about what I thought I was doing. And I don't yet have a new synthesis for what I was doing or kind of a way to write about my intuitions that can really convince people, but I see it as a creative problem of mine. And that's why I hang out at institutions like yours when I could be home quietly typing. There are a lot of things I need to learn. So thank you for your attention.